The wind off the Baltic tasted of rusted chains and rotted kelp, the kind of chill that soaked through wool and settled in bone. Inside the broken yardarm, tallow candles guttered in pools of their own fat, throwing long shadows that danced with the sway of the harbor swell. Each slap of water against the pier outside sounded like the crack of a whip on bare backs Elias knew too well. He balanced a tray of pewter mugs, knuckles white, eyes darting between door and hearth like a cornered gull. At the far end of the smoky room, a woman's voice rose above the grumble of sailors, a single, tremulous note that made the dice stop rattling and the drunkards forget their curses. Lila. Her lute was wrapped in velvet faded from crimson to the color of dried blood, its neck scarred by 1,000 nights of salt and sorrow. She sang of a sailor who'd lost his compass, but every man present heard his own lost heart in the words. Elias felt the melody tug at the frayed edges of memory, his mother humming by a dying fire, a lullaby swallowed by the sea. The door exploded inward, letting in a gust sharp enough to snuff half the candles. 6 men in navy coats poured through, brass buttons gleaming like newly minted coins. Captain Thorne led them, a bull of a man with a voice that could peel paint. "Recruiting party," he barked, though everyone in the room knew the word was sugar over poison. Behind him, 2 burly mates carried manacles that clinked with a promise Elias had evaded for 14 years. Coins vanished from tables. A one-eyed fiddler tucked his bow beneath his coat and melted into the gloom. Elias pressed himself against a pillar, trying to shrink inside his threadbare jacket, but the captain's gaze found him anyway, calculating the span of his shoulders, the steady set of his narrow wrists. "You'll do for topsail," Thorne muttered, already reaching. Lila's song faltered. A final coin, a silver shilling etched with the king's profile, slipped from a drunken farmer's fingers and rolled across warped floorboards toward the captain's boot. Thorne stooped, snatched it, bit it. "Payment for the king's service?" he sneered, pocketing both coin and dignity. Lila clutched her lute tighter, knuckles whitening beneath grime. Elias saw the tremor in her fingers, the way her throat worked around a swallowed protest. He knew that tremor, it lived in his own bones. Then, small, swift, unnoticed, Elias moved. He slid a crust of yesterday's bread across the bar, nudging it beneath Lila's elbow. Their eyes met for the span of a heartbeat, hers the color of storm-torn green glass, his the washed-out blue of winter sea. No words, only the silent recognition that 2 half-drowned souls could still throw each other a rope. Thorne's attention snapped back to Elias. "Name, boy." "Elias, sir." The stammer was real, fear tasted like copper. "Elias, meet the fleet." The captain's grin was all teeth and no warmth. A meaty hand clamped Elias's shoulder, thumb digging deep enough to bruise. Chair scraped. Somewhere a bottle shattered. The tavern stink thickened with fresh sweat. Lila stepped forward, lute strings humming as her grip shifted. "He's just a child. Children grow into men, and men die for king and coin." Thorne's laugh boomed, drowning the last of her song. He backhanded her, casual, cruel. The velvet-wrapped lute hit the floor with a sound like breaking bone. 2 strings snapped, curling like severed veins. Time fractured. Elias saw the lute's broken neck, saw Lila's lips split crimson, saw years of running collapse into this single moment. He lunged, not at the captain but at the lute itself, scooping it beneath the ale-stained straw as if the instrument were a child to be saved. The act was instinct, reflex honed by nights of hiding smaller treasures from bigger predators. Thorne hauled him upright. "Feisty are we? The crow's nest will cure that." Men laughed. Elias's feet barely touched the planks as he was dragged toward the yawning door, toward the night that smelled of tar and captivity. He twisted once, just enough to meet Lila's eyes across the smoky haze. Her lip bled but her gaze held steady, fierce. She mouthed a single word, "Wait." The door slammed. Candle flames shivered. Inside the tavern, silence pooled deeper than the harbor outside. Lila knelt among the straw, cradling the broken lute as if it still sang. A silver shilling glinted beneath her boot, Thorne's coin shaken loose in the scuffle. She closed her fist around it, knuckles whitening. Outside, Elias's heartbeat kept time with the clank of approaching manacles. Somewhere between the slap of waves and the jeers of sailors, he thought he heard the echo of a song, soft, defiant, carrying across the black water like a promise that wasn't broken yet. Charleston's sun at midday had a taste, brass on the tongue, salt in the lungs, the kind of heat that baked blood into dust before it had time to cool. Elias stood on the crude platform, wrists chained so tight the iron had worn blisters into his skin. 3 months since the tavern door slammed, 3 months of ship's timbers and bilge water, of nights spent counting stars through the grating of a slave hold. Now the stars were gone, replaced by a sky the color of scorched pewter and the slow rhythmic thud of an auctioneer's boot on warped planks. Lot 37, the man barked, voice slick as whale oil. Cabin boy, 14 summers, strong lungs, useful for the crow's nest in a gale. Who'll start the bidding at £50 sterling? 50. The number hit Elias like a slap. 50 was more coin than his mother had earned in a lifetime of scrubbing floors. 50 was less than the price of a good musket. He lifted his chin, squinting into the glare. The crowd swirled, planters in linen, brokers with ledgers, women fanning themselves with hymnbook pages torn free of mercy. No faces he knew, no faces that knew him. A fly crawled across his cheek, he couldn't swat it away. The auctioneer's assistant, a boy no older than himself, prodded Elias's ribs with a cane. Straighten up, lad. Show the buyers what God gave you. Elias's spine obeyed before his mind could protest. Muscle memory from the ship, survive first, think later. The bidding began with board increments, 52, 55, voices drifting like smoke rings. Elias's gaze snagged on a flash of emerald at the front rail. Silk the color of deep forest, hemmed in gold thread fraying at the edges. The veil caught the light, turning the woman beneath into a living shard of stained glass. She lifted a gloved hand and the crowd hushed. £100. The words cut through the drone like a blade through sailcloth. Head swiveled. The auctioneer's brows shot up, his gavel hovered mid-air. 100 was twice the opening. 100 was enough to buy a small house or 10 lesser children. Elias's heart stuttered. The woman lowered her veil. Lila. But not the Lila of the tavern. This one had sea weather in the hollows of her cheeks and a scar crossing her left eyebrow like a pale lightning strike. Her loot was gone. In its place she clutched a velvet purse worn soft as skin. When her eyes met his, they held the same storm green he remembered, but sharpened by something fiercer, purpose. The auctioneer recovered. 100 to the lady in green. Do I hear 15? A florid planter lifted a hand. 110. Lila didn't flinch. 120. Her voice carried the same lilt that once coaxed sailors to drop coins into a battered hat, only now every syllable rang like a hammer on iron. 130, the planter growled, sweat beading beneath his wig. Silence rippled outward. Lila's purse sagged open. Elias glimpsed the glint of silver, too little. Her jaw tightened. Then, slowly, she reached into her sleeve and drew out a coil of gold wire, 2 broken lute strings twisted together, soldered into a fragile ring. She held it up so the sun caught the metal. This and 95, she said. The ring belonged to my mother. The strings sang the night I met him. Worth more than your ledger will ever hold. The crowd murmured, uneasy. Sentiment had no place in a market built on flesh and figures. But the auctioneer hesitated. Gold was gold and the wire looked pure. He extended a hand. Captain Thorne stepped from the shade beneath the auction block, coat unbuttoned, belly straining against his waistcoat. He'd aged. Red veins spidered across his nose, but the smirk was the same. A touching tale, he drawled. But business is business. 140 and I'll throw in a barrel of molasses. Elias tasted iron, fear or fury he couldn't tell. Thorne's eyes flicked to him, a predator savoring wounded prey. The captain had not expected to see the boy again. Now he would own him twice. Lila's fingers trembled around the ring. £95 plus the gold was all she had, scraped together singing in dockside taverns, sleeping in alleys eating crusts. Elias saw the calculation behind her eyes, the moment she weighed her life against his. She lifted her chin. 150, she said. The words scraped raw from her throat. Gasps rippled. The planter shook his head, retreating into the crowd. Thorne's smile thinned. 150, the auctioneer echoed, voice honeyed with disbelief. Going once. Elias's knees threatened to buckle. 150 was ruin. 150 was every coin Lila would ever earn. But her gaze never left his, steady as a lighthouse beam. Going twice. Thorne raised a hand. 160. His tone carried lazy certainty, the purse of a king against a street singer's dreams. Lila's shoulders sagged. The ring slipped from her fingers, clinking softly onto the planks. For a heartbeat, the market held its breath. Then she straightened, eyes blazing. 200, she said. The number rang like a gunshot. Silence. Even the gulls overhead seemed to pause mid-cry. 200 was obscene. 200 was ransom for a prince. Thorne's face purpled. The auctioneer's gavel wavered. Lila stepped onto the platform, boots thudding hollow against wood. She reached Elias, fingers brushing the iron at his wrists, quick, grounding. "Hold on," she whispered, voice barely audible over the blood in his ears. "We're leaving this place together." The auctioneer found his tongue. 200 to the lady. Going once. Thorn's hand twitched toward his belt, where a pistol might wait, but the crowd had turned. Sentiment had shifted like tide. A child's worth weighed against a broken lute string and a song sung in a tavern. The gavel fell. Sold. Chains clanked free. Lila's fingers closed around Elias's wrist, warm, calloused, alive. Behind them the market roared back to life, but the sound was muted, distant. Elias stepped off the block, barefoot on sun-scorched planks, and felt the world tilt beneath him. Lila pressed the broken lute string ring into his palm. "For safe passage," she murmured. "And for every note we'll play on the other side of this ocean." As they walked away, the emerald silk caught the wind like a banner, and somewhere deep in Elias's chest, the first true note of freedom began to hum. The ship's bell tolled 8 times, slow, deliberate hammer strikes against the dark. Each clang rolled through Elias's ribs like a second heartbeat gone arrhythmic. Salt crusted his lashes. The brig reeked of bilge and fierce sweat. Somewhere above, Charleston's harbor lamps bobbed in a necklace of fire, close enough to scorch the night, far enough to mock escape. He pressed his ear to the hull plank and counted the footfalls overhead. 3 guards, maybe 4, boots heavy with rum and boredom. Lila knelt beside him, the emerald silk now shredded at the hem, stained with tar and someone else's blood. The broken lute string ring glinted between her fingers, once a promise, now a lockpick. 32 teeth on the ward, she whispered, breath warm against his ear. "Feel for the click." Iron grated iron. A metallic sigh, then the shackle's jaw loosened. Elias's wrist slipped free, skin raw and weeping, but free. He tasted copper and relief. Above, the bell tolled again, 9 strokes now. The tide was turning. They had maybe an hour before the harbor mouth narrowed like a closing fist. They crept through the belly of the brig, shadow stitched to shadow, past crates stamped with the king's seal and barrels of gunpowder sweating in the heat. The air grew thicker with each step until Elias felt it clot in his lungs. At the hatch ladder they paused. Voices drifted down, slurred, laughing. A dice game. Lila pressed a finger to her lips, then drew the broken lute string taut between her hands. She'd strangled a man with less. Elias swallowed hard. 1 guard descended first, lantern swinging. The light carved the stairwell into gold and black. Lila moved like smoke. A flick of the wire, a choked gurgle, the lantern clattering but caught before it struck the deck. The guard's body folded inward, knees kissing chest. They climbed. The main deck sprawled under a canopy of stars, masts scratching the sky like broken bones. Lanterns swung from the yards, casting arcs of fire that slid across tarred planks. Elias's bare feet recoiled from the heat. To port, the wharf lamps flickered. Freedom at 200 yards, freedom guarded by muskets and dogs. "Smuggler's skiff," Lila breathed, nodding toward a jolly boat tethered astern. "But the tide's against us." As if summoned, a new voice cut through the dark. Captain Thorn, unmistakable, the same lazy drawl that had sold Elias like cargo. "Light the fuses," he ordered. "If we can't have the boy, the king won't either." Elias's stomach dropped. He followed Thorn's gesture and saw it. A line of black powder snaking from the mainmast to the powder magazine below, already hissing, already hungry. Tick, tick. The fuse burned faster than thought. Lila grabbed Elias's wrist. "Choice time," she said. "Cut and run, or stay and drown every soul aboard." His mind flashed. Sarah's lullaby, the tavern's broken lute, the emerald silk now wrapped around a throat instead of a dream. He inhaled smoke and salt. "We cut," he said. "But not for us. For them too." They sprinted. The fuse hissed like a serpent. 20 paces. 15. Elias dropped, fingers scrabbling for the powder trail. He found it rough, gritty, alive. Lila's dagger flashed, severing the cord an inch from the flame. The spark died with a soft pop as anticlimactic as a kiss. But the silence lasted only a heartbeat. Overboard. Thorn's roar split the night. Muskets cracked. Splinters exploded inches from Elias's ear. He tasted cedar and gunpowder. They dove. The water hit like a wall of knives, cold enough to stop a heart. Beneath the surface, the world muted to drumbeats. His pulse, Lila's kicking feet, the distant thud of boots on deck. They surfaced under the jolly boat's shadow. Hands hauled them aboard, rough, anonymous, smelling of rum and fish. The smuggler, a woman with a scar across her lip, grinned. "Thought you'd never ask," she said, slicing the painter. The current seized them, spinning the skiff toward the harbor mouth. Behind, Thorn's brig loomed, sails billowing like black lungs. Cannon ports yawned open. 6 shots, the smuggler muttered, counting. Then they reload. Elias gripped the gunwale. Charleston lights blurred, then sharpened, so close he could smell bread baking, hear church bells. Lila crouched beside him, hair plastered to her cheeks, the lute string ring still looped around her thumb. A cannon roared. The ball screamed past, raising a geyser 10 feet starboard. Salt spray drenched them. "Paddle!" Lila shouted. They paddled, hands blistering, backs burning, hearts hammering in sync with the distant ship's bell. Each stroke carried them further from the brig, closer to shore, closer to a future still unwritten. As the skiff scraped sand, Elias looked back. Thorn stood at the rail, silhouette cut from darkness, fist raised in silent fury. But the brig could not follow the shallows. The tide, once enemy now ally, carried the ship out to sea on a slow, inexorable leash. Lila collapsed beside Elias on the wet sand, emerald silk soaked black. She opened her fist. The lute string ring was gone, lost to the sea or the struggle, he couldn't tell. But her voice when she spoke was steady. "Next choice," she said. "North to freedom or west to whatever comes after." The church bells tolled midnight, 12 slow strokes that felt like a benediction. Elias closed his eyes, felt the sand shift beneath him, tasted salt and possibility. "North," he said. "But first we find a lute." Lila laughed, short, surprised like the first bird after a storm. Above them the stars wheeled slow and indifferent, but for the first time in 3 months, Elias didn't count them. He simply breathed. The storm hit like a wall of black glass. One moment the smuggler's brig, Sea Widow, cut through moonlit swells. The next, the sky cracked open and poured wrath. Wind screamed through rigging, turning rope into whipcord that slashed cheeks raw. Rain came sideways, needles of ice that stung eyes shut. Elias clung to the foremast, bare feet sliding on deck slime, and felt the world tilt 30 degrees before snapping back. Lila stood at the helm, hair plastered to her face like wet kelp, emerald silk now shredded to streamers that snapped like battle flags. Her free hand gripped Elias's tin compass, the last relic of his mother, and held it toward the smuggler captain, a woman called Bracken with a shark-tooth earring and eyes the color of storm tide. "North-northwest keeps us clear of the shoals." Lila shouted over the gale. Bracken bared teeth. "North-northwest runs us straight into a British patrol. Payment first, sweetheart." Elias's stomach lurched with the deck. They had no coin left, only the compass and Lila's voice. Bracken knew it. A wave the size of a church reared up, smashed across the bow, and tried to drag Elias overboard. He caught a line, salt water flooding his mouth, lungs burning. When the deck righted, Bracken had drawn a pistol. "Compass or the boy stays topside as ballast." Lila stepped between them, rain streaming off her chin. "You'll get your fee in Carolina gold," she lied. "But if you toss the boy you'll sail blind." "I sing the reefs awake, I've done it since I was 9. Bracken's eyes narrowed. "Prove it." Lightning forked, illuminating the deck like daylight. In that flash Elias saw the smuggler's crew, 6 men and 2 women, frozen midlash, waiting for the verdict. Thunder rolled like distant cannon. Lila drew a ragged breath, then opened her mouth. The song that spilled out was not words but wind, low, keening, threading through the gale until the rigging hummed in answer. It was the ballad of the Sea Widow herself, the ghost story every sailor whispered over rum, how the first captain sold his soul for speed and now steered only toward doom. Lila's voice wrapped around the myth and twisted it, turning the curse into a promise. "Guide us true," and the curse lifts. The crew listened, faces pale. Bracken's pistol wavered. Elias felt the deck steady beneath them, as if the brig leaned into the song instead of against the storm. For a heartbeat the wind eased. But the ocean was not so easily bargained with. A rogue wave, higher than the mast, rose out of the dark and slammed the port side. Wood shrieked. A cannon tore free of its lashings and crashed across the deck, pinning a sailor's leg. Screams mingled with wind. Bracken spun, pistol now pointed at the sky. "Enough. We run south for the cove, storm be damned." Lila's voice cracked. "South is sandbars and redcoats. North is watery graves. Choose." Elias looked at the compass still clutched in Bracken's fist. The needle spun wildly, caught between iron nails and lightning. Useless. He thought of his mother, how she'd spun stories of islands where lutes grew on trees and no child wore chains. Those islands lay west, beyond the storm's teeth. He stepped forward, water sluicing off his skin. We go west. Bracken laughed harsh. West is open ocean and no wind to fill a sail. Elias pointed upward. The topsail had torn clean, the ragged strips snapped like a banner. Then we ride the gale. Reef the mainsail, lash everything else. We surf the storm. The crew stared. No sane captain ran before a tempest. It was suicide sung in a minor key. But Bracken's eyes flicked to Lila, still humming low, and to the compass spinning like a drunken bee. She spat into the wind. Surf it is. If we die, boy, you'll sing us into the deep. They worked like demons. Canvas came down, lines were knotted, bodies thrown across decks slick as slaughterhouse floors. Elias felt the brig heel again, but this time with purpose. The storm became a beast they rode instead of fought. Lightning flashed, once, twice, revealing a black wall of water ahead. Beyond it, the faint silhouette of a British frigate, lanterns glowing like predator eyes. Bracken cursed. Storm or soldiers, pick your coffin. Lila grabbed Elias's hand. Her palm was cut, salt stinging the wound, but her grip was iron. Compass is dead. My voice is not. Trust me. He did. She sang again, this time a hymn his mother had taught him about mercy in the middle of the sea. The crew joined without knowing the words, their rough voices weaving a rope of sound that bound them to the mast and to each other. The Sea Widow crested the rogue wave, hung at the peak like a gull on a thermal, then plunged down the far side. Wind howled through the rigging, spray blinded. But when the wave receded, the frigate's lanterns were smaller, dimmer, swallowed by rain. Elias laughed, sharp, wild, free. Bracken looked back, eyes wide, and for the first time lowered the pistol. Yet freedom had a price. The mainsail tore with a sound like ripping canvas soles. The mast cracked, once, twice, tilted. Bracken shouted orders, but the storm answered only with thunder. Lila met Elias's gaze across the tilting deck. Choice again, she shouted. Cut the mast and risk sinking or let it drag us under. The fog rolled in on cat-quiet paws, swallowing the cove until only the hush of breathing and the drip of water from rigging remained. Dawn was a bruised line of violet low in the east, and every second it brightened felt like a noose tightening. Sea Widow lay half-beached, mast splintered but hull intact, her bowsprit pointing toward the open Atlantic like an accusation. 30 paces up the sand, Captain Thorne stood ringed by his surviving crew, 6 men, 2 women, all armed, all exhausted. Their muskets made a fence of iron between Elias, Lila, and the longboat that could carry them away. Elias's shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him. Salt and sweat stung the wound raw. Lila stood in front of him, emerald silk now a tattered banner, the broken lute string ring gleaming on her thumb like a tiny noose. In her other hand she held Elias's mother's compass, its cracked glass catching the first sliver of sun. Thorne's voice came low, almost conversational. End of the line, songbird. The boy comes back as cargo or we all watch the tide wash you out. He cocked the pistol with a click that echoed off the fog. Behind him, the crew shifted, eyes flicking between captain and singer, loyalty thinning like cheap rum. Lila took one step forward, bare feet sinking in cold sand. There's a third way, she said. You lower the guns, we lower the past. Thorne laughed, short, bitter. Songs don't pay debts. Mine do. She lifted her voice, not in a shout, but in a ballad soft as lullaby and sharp as broken glass. It was the same tune she'd sung the night Elias first saw her in the tavern, the one about a sailor who lost his compass and found his soul. Only now the words twisted, naming every man present. Bracken's scar earned defending a sister. Jed's gold tooth paid for a child's medicine. Even Thorne's first ship bought with blood money after a winter he'd sworn no crew would starve again. One by one musket barrels dipped. The fog carried her voice into their ribs, cracked open memories they'd soldered shut with rum and rage. Jed lowered his weapon entirely, eyes wet. Bracken's knuckles whitened on the stock but did not raise. Thorne's pistol trembled. Shut your mouth. Lila sang on, stepping closer until the muzzle kissed the hollow beneath her collarbone. The lute string ring caught the dawn, flashing like a beacon. Pull the trigger, she whispered between notes, and the song stops, but the story keeps singing long after your bones. For the first time, fear flickered in the captain's eyes, fear not of death, but of being remembered only as the man who silenced mercy. Behind him the crew parted. Jed stepped forward, musket reversed like a staff. We never signed on to murder children, Captain. Another voice, Mara the bosun, added, we signed on to outrun kings, not outrun our own ghosts. Thorne spun, pistol sweeping the half-circle. Mutiny is it? Memory, Bracken corrected. You taught us profit. She's teaching us price. Elias moved then, not with violence, but with the quiet authority of a boy who'd already died once. He placed the cracked compass into Thorn's free hand. My mother traded her voice for this. I'm trading it back for yours. The compass needle spun, frantic, then settled, pointing not north but toward the longboat, toward whatever lay beyond the horizon's blood-red seam. Thorn stared at the tiny instrument, at his reflection warped in the cracked glass. His knuckles loosened, the pistol lowered. From the rigging, a gull screamed, breaking the spell. Dawn spilled over the dunes, painting the fog gold. The tide hissed higher, licking the sea widow as keel, impatient to leave. Lila held out her hand, palm up, no weapon, just the broken lute string ring. One last verse, Captain. You choose the ending. Thorn looked at the ring, at Elias's steady gaze, at the crew who suddenly looked like family he'd forgotten he had. He took the ring, slid it onto his smallest finger where it fit like a shackle made of song, and nodded, once sharp. West, he said. To islands where no king collects tariffs on mercy. The crew erupted, not cheers but breaths released all at once, like sails filling with wind. Muskets clattered to sand. The longboat was lowered. Elias and Lila climbed in first, then Jed, then Mara, until only Thorn remained on the beach. He looked back at the broken sea widow, at the mast that would never stand again, and finally stepped into the boat. As they pushed off, Lila began to sing, soft, steady, a hymn for the drowned and the saved alike. Halfway to the horizon, Elias opened his palm. The compass needle no longer spun, it pointed west, unwavering. He glanced at Lila. Think they'll let us land? She smiled, sun in her teeth. They'll hear us coming long before they see us. Behind them, the first full light of morning ignited the fog into gold. Ahead, the ocean stretched infinite and unwritten.